Okay, welcome back. We'll get started and proceed with our meeting. And from our short recess, which was very needed. So we're down to number 11 on our agenda, and it's to adopt a resolution approving the 2018 budget for the general funds and other budgetary funds of Utah County. It was continued from last week. There is a resolution that's on there, and then the numbers that you see on the documents are the numbers of additional asks other than what was submitted or that were included in the tentative budget. So just to clarify that, there were some additional asks that as we went down through, we found that it was already in the tentative budget. Oh, okay, hang on one second. Looks like Commissioner Graves is not with us. They'll give me a chance to eat one of these candy bars.
Hello.
All right, Commissioner, we're back.
Thank you.
We just, we're starting to look at the number 11, adopt a resolution approving the budget and other budgetary funds. And on the documents is a resolution, and then also attached on there is the additional asks that were on there. And you'll notice, or may have noticed, that there are some additional asks that are not on there from our conversation last week, and that means that they were already in the tentative budget. So they're the ones that were asked. So this is kind of a cleaner version of the additional asks that are on there, and the total amount for the additional asks is $13,707,309 with excuse me, with additional asks. And so I asked a question last week, and we have $78.8 million in projected revenue. Our tentative budget came really close to that. It was if I'm not mistaken, Danina, about $250,000 less than that tentative, or less than that projected revenue. So if you want to keep that number in your mind as well. And then knowing that, getting back to my other notes, we took the $2.2 million and the $1 million, so $3.2 million as we're looking at salaries. That's also over and above the 78.8. And so I just asked on a philosophical basis for us to consider where we feel comfortable, if we feel comfortable with getting to a number for the budget that we can work with. I'd like to see if we can maybe have a discussion on that, on what that number might be other than the projected revenues over and above that would have to come out of our reserves, to see if we can then have a discussion on budgetary fashions. And anyway, so that's kind of where we're at there. I don't know if we want to, I'd like to have that discussion, but is there anything from the clerk auditor's office that we need to discuss further as we're looking at the budget?
What up?
You want to sit at this table over here?
No,
You okay? Okay.
but just keep in mind the benefits.
I don't know if Commissioner Graves can hear you is the problem.
Yeah.
I can only hear you, Commissioner Lee.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll just,
Okay.
the benefits, like the chain,
Yeah, just the one factor was the additional information that we're needing from HR as far as benefits and all the changes after the open enrollment period.
we have the numbers, they're just
Yeah.
not on.
And they're not on the sheet.
Okay. Okay, we have the numbers for the benefits, they're just not necessarily on this sheet.
Yeah, so just the caveat there is just, as we go through this, there still will be just some final massaging of the numbers for you as we true up what the actual expenses are in these different areas, particular as it comes to wages and benefits.
Yeah, I anticipate, and this is just my thought and my anticipation in looking at this. Obviously, we put some backstops in place for meetings, not that they have to happen, they're just there for work session items in the next upcoming days. So I would hope that we can get some rough cut outlines of where we're at, and I would assume that we'd probably fully adopt the budget next week. But I just have those in place just in case we have to work down through some processes for this next upcoming week. All right, any discussion? Some discussion, I'm sure.
Well, so I appreciate what you're trying to do with the budget as far as wanting to pick a number, but I think the real exercise, since it's such an open forum, is that we go through and actually assess the actual needs, because the problem is picking a number, then all of a sudden we start dictating, and having to decide what the needs are. So I think we probably ought to go through everybody's tentative budgets, or just even scrap it and just ask all of their requests and go through them department by department, kind of like we've done in the past.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, we've done that with the tentative budget, running down through the tentative. I guess my overall concern is that as we've discussed, there's $9.7 million there. This is an ask for 13, plus we've already got the 3.2 plus that's in there.
We're down to 6.5.
So, we've
Yeah,
got,
but here's my concern with the tentative budget is I know we had all talked. We weren't actually involved in the tentative budget.
correct? So there's concerns in the tentative budget that you'd like to bring up, or issues?
Well, I'm just saying that I think the best way to go through is department by department. I mean, I have all the paperwork in front of me, so I'm ready to do whatever you'd like. But I mean, to do a philosophical talk about what's our comfort level for a budgetary number to try and fit everything into, I think misses the point. I think that to me that just doesn't feel like being responsible leaders. To me, what it is talking about the service level of Utah County residents and talking about what the essential needs of the county are, and then funding them. And that way, when and if we go for truth and taxation, we've started that conversation.
My problem is for establishing the budget, I have to have a number.
Sure, but again, we know what the revenue number is. The revenue number is somewhere between $78 and $79 million. So the question is what essential services do you not want to fund if we're going to be revenue and be in balance, or do we want to talk about the needs and of the county and then find a way to pay for it? And if we don't really have the money, then we need to either cut somewhere and have that discussion, or find places in the budget where maybe things can be purchased or bought, or staff increases, whatever, later in the time of year, so that we can go through that process.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, but there's one, we obviously, if you just look at the big picture numbers with the 78.8 and the numbers we have for the market study and the additional asks here, we're over. So
We've been over every year for a decade.
no,
We're over our reserve balance.
we're over our reserve balance on this one, is what I'm saying, not necessarily the projected revenue.
But again, we haven't talked about all the needs and additional requests. We haven't decided upon any of those, because some of them don't actually affect the revenue, because we don't go into reserve if we grant everything in the assessor's office, because he's asked for 2 additional things, because that's out of the assessing and collecting fee. We can give Jeff Smith everything he wants, because it's also got a huge balance that we've short funded out of that. And so you see some of those, it's crazy to have a big number because they don't impact that.
And you're right, we got assessing, we have different buckets of money that are out there, and you got assessing and collecting, you've got property tax, which is typically our general fund, those, but they, so maybe we should look at
Maybe,
general fund.
I think we start with general fund, what would draw from the general fund. The health department, obviously, for me personally, I have no problem granting, their clinical assistant 3 because it's funded by revenue. So it's not like I'm having
Did you say health department? I'm sorry. You need to speak in the mic for me,
Yep.
please.
Sorry, the health department, right? So like they have a additional ask for a clinical assistant 3, 15,000, but it's funded by revenue. So that, to me, that's an easy yes.
Hey, hold on. If you let me give you all of the easy in the health department, because since that's my portfolio, I can tell you exactly what he'd like. The real question is do we want to discuss any career ladder advancements with what's going on? Because if we're talking about inequity, the career ladder should actually help still adjust that. So do you want me to skip over career ladder or not?
Well, it's funded by revenue according to the note I have for career ladder.
Most of the health department is,
Right.
but still there's additional. So there's still additional outlay to the county. So for example, one of the deputy registrar one that he has is for the Payson building that's going to come. So it won't be a full year fund, but the revenue doesn't come in before the county expends the funds, obviously.
Right.
So but not all of his are revenue generating, because, for example, Ralph has stated the need for a nurse, a school nurse. I'm trying to find it because these aren't in alphabetical order. Sorry.
He's got the health scientist, the public health nurse.
Yeah, the public health nurse 2, the one that's split. This is his highest priority, so that one he needs. And then there's also one that goes for Provo School District that was cut years ago, and then they would bring back
Right.
in.
I have, Ralph's coming, and I have a question. We can start there. I have a question for you. Why does the county have to pay for school nurses? Why did the schools not pay for those?
Well, schools. Much of it, but there's some things that we would have to do even if we didn't have the schools, nurses in the schools. And so part of that comes from us and our costs that we would have had regardless of whether we had a school nurse in the school. As you look at our priorities, though, most of the things we submitted were funded by additional revenues. Probably the things that are the highest priority for us. We really, really need another nurse to help with epidemiology. The hepatitis A outbreak has really shown us, as we've tried to deal with the populations in the jail, help the sheriff's office with immunizations of their staff, and even last night we were doing the annex. It's buried us. We really need more staff. We've had to drop everything else to try to address the hepatitis A thing.
Okay.
And we just don't have the staff to do what we need to do to protect the citizens of our county from disease outbreaks. So we really need that one, plus the one that's going to be funded by contract funds. The Provo School District would probably be the next priority, and then the last priority that's coming from tax dollars would be the environmental health scientists. So,
Okay, so
in our
this
case.
is, if I can ask you a question
sure.
on this, I have on this list here, I have a full-time deputy register 1, which is funded by revenue.
Okay.
I've got the health scientist, which is general fund.
Right.
And then I have some, the clinical assistant 3, which is funded by revenue. Public health nurse, funded by revenue. Other public health nurse, funded by revenue. And then I have one public health nurse 2 that is general fund.
And that's the
That's the one you-
epidemiologist I was just
Okay.
talking
That's the
about.
one that's your big need.
That's the one we
Okay.
really, really need.
And then I've got public health nurse 2, another one funded by revenue. A health educator tech, funded by revenue. Public health nurse funded by revenue. And then you got public health, another funded, this is funded by general fund at 17,000 and another funded by revenue at 25, so it's kind of a split on that one.
Yeah, that's the Provo School District nurse.
And then you've got medical billing funded by revenue, and you got location support funded by revenue. So I only see in here the partial one,
Right,
and then the public health nurse 2,
right.
and the health scientist one.
Environmental health
Those are the only
scientist.
ones that I see on
Yeah,
here
it's
that
just
are
those-
for this discussion.
So we have the two that would be fully funded, one that's partially. Now, speaking of the environmental health scientists, the Board of Health did raise the fees of our septic, our wastewater services fairly significantly in September, which we wouldn't have had for this budget. A good part of that position could actually probably be paid from those fees, that fee increase.
Oh, really?
Okay.
All right.
Well, that's if we let you keep the revenue and don't keep putting it back into the general fund or our fund.
Well,
balance.
ours never goes back to the general fund, it goes to the health department surplus, you know,
Okay.
which we use to fund the department as well. So.
And the only limitations we've had on there has just been some limitations in the past, right? On how much you keep in there?
Well, yeah, there's always that concern, what happens, as you talked about, it's never a good idea to use surplus for ongoing expenses, you know, as the commission's talked about that in the past. Same applies for the health department, but, you know, we've historically had a pretty good, turnover rate of our staff, you know, and attrition helps a lot with that. And then we're conservative in our, revenue estimates, which we've been asked to do, and so usually we bring in a little bit more than we expect as well. And all those things help to keep the surplus fairly stable. Deneen in the auditor's office may be able to have additional comments about that. But we try to act responsibly. Okay. All right.
Thank you. Okay. Do we want to just go down this list and keep going?
Sure, let's just work back up. That
Let's-
gives us about 103,000 from the health department. The general fund would have to.
All of those added together.
That did not include the health scientist, that 103. Because the health scientist. That'd have the public health nurse too, and the partially funded.
Okay,
public
I'm
health
back,
nurse
thank
two
you.
that's split. And the health scientist, my personal feeling, if we've got revenue, I'd love to identify how much of that and then act accordingly there.
What we maybe could consider on that is we could watch the revenues as they come in this year and perhaps have that later in the year as a hire
That
to
would
save
be,
some money, something like that.
That would
But
be-
we'd be happy to look at that.
that would be a
because
thought I'd throw out there, is can we just look at where that revenue's coming in at, and then we'd get a good
The
idea.
growth of the county is just, it's pushing us so hard in
know.
the wastewater and construction, you know, you know, where they want to build, they're wanting to build in marginal areas, and so we're considering you know, alternative systems, which take us a lot of time to look at and to make sure that, you know, the last thing you want if you're building a new home is to have it full of sewage.
That would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And didn't
And
we
it's your
fund
own
one,
sewage, yeah.
one last year? Was there one that we funded last year?
Last year, there was two.
Two, okay.
Yeah. One that was funded and then one was restricted, and you
That's right.
lifted the restrictions.
That's right, okay. All
IT,
right,
work backwards.
go backwards with it. Let me get to the.
The IT one's pretty simple, it's $1,860 for emails.
If you guys don't speak in the mics, I really can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Commissioner.
We got the budget passed already.
Sweet.
So we were just discussing IT, and they have $1,860 in extra ask for emails.
Yeah.
Wait a second. We're on different pages, I'm sure, because I'm not seeing.
Let me pull up my IT.
Training sheriff. I'm not seeing.
Unless that was withdrawn.
Unless I'm not seeing that on this current one. Am I missing it somewhere? Sheriff's or
I-
records?
On my list, it's right in between the sheriff and the health department.
So
Did I,
for
IT,
IT,
yeah, did they withdraw the request for emails? Group email addresses?
I'm not,
Okay, for IT, I'm sorry, I pulled up information systems, I'm sorry.
Neil, you still need $1,800 for group emails?
I'm not seeing that. Was that one in the, already in the tentative?
Goes 121 through 135.
35.
At the bottom of page 4. And
Oh,
even
okay.
those,
Oh, it's listed underneath mine as departments with attorney, auditor, so it's everyone in there.
yeah,
Yes.
because,
Okay.
yeah, because essentially those
I was
pass
looking
through
for
the
IT.
IT
It
department.
comes through IT, oh, okay, yeah, it comes through IT, but,
But
Yeah.
it's the request by the individual departments that
Oh,
they need
that's
additional emails. So
true,
it helps in the operation.
yeah. So it's technically not a IT ask.
Oh, there we go. Over on the notes, it says requested by IT
Yeah.
department. Okay. I was looking under the departments. Okay, so the question is, Neil here? I don't know. Oh, there we go. Neil, do you want to speak to it?
There we go. What these requests are is when we build our support rate for the 670 fund, we did not include email addresses that are not assigned to a person. We included everything that was assigned to an actual employee, but we have several email addresses that have been requested that are, we call them groups. They're like a department name or a special project name at utahcounty.gov that are over and above what we supply for just the employees. So we put all these together. Previously, we billed these at the time that they were requested when this was in group-wise. Now we have a subscription, so we have to account for these email boxes individually. So what this request is actually a request to include this in every department that has requested these. And the total is, there's $2,160 worth of them. The rate is $5 per month, which is the subscription rate for a standard Outlook mailbox.
Okay. Thoughts on that?
Pretty
Nope,
straightforward.
I'm supportive of it.
All right. What's the next one that you have on your agenda? I'll see if I can find it on mine.
I've got wildland
Okay.
fire.
So Wildland Fire has on their URS reclassification. That's $125,000 for reclassification. Prevention. That's a prevention captain operations and a full-time prevention captain, overtime, and 3 utility beds and a Ford truck.
So the trucks we currently have in our arsenal, these are just upgrades to more modern trucks. So they will be using, so that number, if I remember right, and that's the only number I forgot to verify with Dan or Deneen, if the recapitalization is accurately reflected in that number for the new purchase with what we already have.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
No? Okay,
See what the recapitalization.
to me, their big request is the URS and the prevention captain.
And after seeing the list of how many people, I don't know how we don't do that.
Yeah, it's Kevin here. Sheriff, you want to speak to that?
This is a request to move them into the public safety that we've been working on for many years. That covers the full-time individuals that are not seasonal, and I think the total is 8.
And all the entities that are public safety that they showed us the list, they should be as well.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
I think
they're
are about the
public
only one in the state right now.
Yeah.
that are not. And who qualify under the job description of firefighter.
So the only thing that's weird about these additional budget requests on these guys after the URS is some of this actually goes into the state's new plan for our fire suppression and mitigation costs, right?
Right. The additional personnel goes directly to that offset cost that we're supposed to produce
Right.
for
So the real
state.
question is, does the commission want to fund and give it to somebody here to help us in mitigation, or just pay it to the state directly, I guess?
Well, that's not even an option anymore. They took that away. So basically, if you don't fulfill that mandate, then you're not insured, and there will be no coverage from the state. So it's an all or nothing. Where it used to be that, yeah, if there was a segment you didn't meet, then you could pay that directly to the state. That is gone now. So you either are meeting those numbers or you're not available to the state insurance pool. And it's not really a pool anymore, as you know. They just cover those costs.
Yeah, I've had a lot of discussion on this.
Right.
There are some points that give me some pause just because of being in the discussions at the very beginning with it. And understanding, and I saw their process and how they're trying to get to those numbers, and I applaud them for working down through those scenarios. And I was trying to find a way in which the ultimate goal in this program is to be up in the mountains somewhere
That's
and
right.
mitigate the
risk.
fire hazards and the risks that we have.
That's right.
And so we worked through all the scenarios saying, well, what is that percentage? Should we have it be 60%, 40%, whatever percent, I don't know what it is, an actual work that's being done to accomplish that goal in the end. And in looking at these numbers, I think we're gonna have to realize that even with the captain, and it's a second captain, and with the additional chippers that we have, and then we're also paying for the crews to be up there. The part that gives me the most pause on that is the volunteers. Because it was sold to us that we can capture the volunteers' time and put that as a bank towards this as much as possible, volunteers being those up there. And I see that number shrinking, and our number of the amount of money that we're paying out growing. And so that's where the pause comes for me, and I don't know how to find the balance in that. I really don't, Sheriff. It just
Right.
kind of, it does bother me.
If I remember the conversations too, though, that we've had, the additional manpower there should be the factor that tips us over into being able to capture as much as possible of those volunteer hours. They would not be up there unsupervised. Those additional people could split their forces with additional chippers and on locations and work on 2 and 3 locations at a time rather than just one. So you're maximizing that time frame where volunteers are available and being able to maximize the capture of those hours by having them supervised with that additional person that they're asking
Yeah,
for.
and
I think we'll get
It's
there.
just-
I think we will.
I wish we could have some percentage or something where we say, 10%, 20% of this is going to be captured, because otherwise these captains are out there and they're taking their crews up there, which we're paying to do, and I get it that the volunteers are like herding cats. They really are, and you're wondering if they're getting the work done appropriately. But that was kind of how we were thinking of doing the offset with the money on this. If we're paying our crews to do it, and we're up there and we're not using the volunteers, I think it kind of defeats what we started off trying to accomplish.
I would agree. I think the issue is that the technical and the more dangerous parts of those operations are what we're using these people for. And then you use the volunteers for giving them the less technical hose and shovels to be able to do that part, which is necessary, but is labor intensive.
Yeah.
And it's not really practical to pay somebody to do that where we can get a volunteer to do that.
Yeah, that was gonna be my statement as we've been going into this. We do need those people. I think Mr. Shawcroft would have a serious issue if we had a volunteer feeding a chipper or running a chainsaw. And dragging the wood around and everything like that, that is what we can use them for, but there's still a core group, liability-wise, that we have to put up there to run some of that heavy equipment and make sure that no one gets drug into it.
And again, I at the risk of and just being flippant, but if this is not gonna work out, then we can re-review this and see where we are at the end of the year. I believe it'll get us to where we need to get that balance so that we're not having to put additional funds into that or more manpower. I think we can come up with those volunteers.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a good history of volunteerism throughout the county, and we've had a lot of success in the sheriff's office having people come work for us. They like to do that.
Yeah. Okay, well. And these, this captains, or these two captains, this is their full-time job. That's what they do. They're not out doing other stuff. They're there 365, well, let's just do work days. We don't want to put them in overtime forever. Yeah, I mean, this is what they do, and that's, so we should be expecting that. Okay, any other thoughts on that?
No, I'm okay with it.
And that total is, has anybody added that up yet?
Are we counting the
Right.
trucks, or are we getting rid of the trucks? The hard part's where we don't know if that's a $70,000 brand new truck, that we gotta come up with 70 grand, or if we've gotta come up with that.
I thought that
Well-
was, I thought that was just a cab and chassis is all I remember.
Would,
No, one is new, and the other three are new, but replacing with current equipment.
and as far as the one truck, does Gina happen to know? How much is,
I mean, the 450, 70 grand for a 450 is in the ballpark, especially for a strip down, because if you went with another one, it'd be 90 to 100,000, so.
Sorry, Mike Brower, Sheriff's Office. That 70 grand was for the vehicle and also the utility bed associated with that. We currently have a purchase order in for that. However, the vehicle won't be available till February, so we're asking that to be rolled over that way. But
Okay, so that can,
if that's the vehicle we're speaking about, which I assume it is.
It is.
so that can be rolled over then.
And there-
Yes,
and there-
through the process, through your approval, we've submitted and have requisitions for the truck and the utility bed currently.
Right.
It won't
But
be
there's
available
no
till
recap
28.
on that because it was a grant-funded vehicle.
Well, we're talking
Correct.
about the new one.
Talking about the new.
Right. But it says in your additional request, this is to replace the 2003 Ford F-250 with utility bed, and that Ford F-250 from 2003 was grant-funded and therefore doesn't have any recap. Correct?
I believe so. I could be wrong. Kevin's out of the state right now.
Sure.
Okay, that's correct.
But fortunately, okay, and then the other two, though, we've got rollover for, so I don't have to come up with that. 100 and whatever it is, 108 for those vehicles, if we can roll it over from this year.
Sorry, Jamie's here. She can explain that, the non-capitalized vehicle. You can
Okay.
catch her breath here real quick.
Sorry, I wasn't instructed to be here, so trying to make it. The vehicle, is that on the additional request that we put in? I'm trying to play catch up.
The one that we have on there right now is the Ford F-450 for 70,000.
Okay, that is different than the prevention truck that we originally requested. Okay. So the 3 utility truck beds,
Yes.
those are to go on the vehicles that are approved, that were budgeted in for recapitalization for this coming 2018 year. Sorry. The additional truck, our crew actually requires 4 vehicles to run it. So the 4th vehicle was not recapitalized, and we were only getting the 3. But the hand crew actually has to have 4 in order to transport 21 people. Oh, sorry, Jamie Nelson, Utah County Fire. I ran from the parking lot. So that 4th truck, that's the 450, is not the prevention vehicle that just went through. This is actually so we can keep the hand crews mobilized nationally to take fire resource orders. So that will be the 4th and final truck to finish up the crew package to transport the hand crew.
Okay.
That would be new.
That was new, so it's not, no recap.
Yeah, and it's the numbers that we've gotten from the motor pool as far as The other 3 vehicles being purchased in that.
And this is
program.
cab and chassis, right? That's.
Yes, that's the full
7.
buildup on the truck. That includes the utility bed, the vehicle itself, and the
Oh.
whole package.
Okay,
We wrapped the utility beds on the other ones. It wasn't counted into the recap. We wanted to give a complete package cost for that truck that needed, and that's the 70,000.
and that would give you the 4 vehicles that you're talking about, because the
Yes.
3 different utility beds would then go to the other vehicles.
To the other vehicles that are in recap, this 4th one completes it. These vehicles have been in request for 5 years now. We're operating on vehicles that are 10 to 12 years well past what they do, so.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So that's in the calculations. What's that number that you come to?
I don't know, it's, my calculator's gotta work on that one.
345, 281.
345, 281. Okay. Going up your list, is the next one
Sheriff,
sheriff's?
enforcement.
We have that list with us here too, so
Are you looking-
wherever you want to start.
Let me find where the,
Enforcement
Oh,
starts
yes.
at line 88 and goes through line 114.
all right, let's start with enforcement then.
Okay,
So we've got, operation and maintenance for 39.7.
okay, line 88, 97.
Oh, correct. So these are funds that we are asking for to replace the funds cut to meet the number, the initial budget number that was provided to us. That includes 1,000-hour employee, some overtime funds, and some minor funds that we had to take out to match that number. So that 39,700 is funding to meet what was taken out to meet the initial budget number provided.
So going back to actual cost.
Yeah, actual costs we took out of 1,000-hour monies out of judicial, patrol, and some overtime out of patrol as well.
Okay. Just keep going down the list. Next one's the forensic lab and training software.
That's not the one that we cut out.
That you guys got from the attorney's office.
89, line 89.
All right, so 89 is the forensic lab training and software requests that were made to keep the lab that we obtained from the county attorney's office functional, to obtain those certifications for the forensic lab itself, and training associated with that software to run the programs.
So there should be some reduction out of the county attorney's office on their budget from that same, I don't know if it's a dollar for dollar, but there was a reduction because they're not doing that anymore.
Do we see that? Do we see that reduction?
That number was not included in the number that was.
So when we obtained that lab from the county attorney's office, the funding wasn't put in the budget, it was placed in restricted, an restricted account, so we're just asking for that funding that was there to come across into the actual budget.
Jeff Beum, County Attorney. I'm not sure where the money went, but it hasn't been in the county attorney's budget, at least not in 2017. So I'm not sure where it is, but it doesn't come out of our budget. I don't know where it is.
It was taken.
Yeah, it was moved from our budget, right, and put somewhere. I don't know if it was restricted or your.
Are you saying last year it was moved that way, or?
Last year.
2017.
This year.
It was in restricted funding and it's been transferred out as the sheriff's office was requested it.
Correct, so it was in a restricted
Wasn't it done
account.
after January?
Yeah, 2017, so after January. Was that after, that was after January 2017?
Yeah, it's during this budget season that change was made.
So what we've done is we've requested those funds from a restricted line to acquire that training and the software, and now we're just asking that funding be placed in the initial, in the actual budget instead of the restricted.
As ongoing.
So it was restricted, why was it restricted before? We know why? I don't remember.
Because we've had a habit of restricting everything.
That wasn't in our budget initially, so I don't know why it was
We
restricted.
usually restrict for, you know, if there's gonna be a cost, like a vehicle, we don't know exactly what it's gonna cost, or if it's gonna be used.
Right, or an
How
increase
much was
from
it
year to
used
year.
this last year? Was the
Right.
lab used this last year?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Mike Forshee, I think it was restricted with the idea going behind it is the person, we hadn't hired the person yet, we hadn't gotten the equipment yet, so there was a lag time, that there was the hope of saving money versus just taking everything from the county attorney's pot and putting it into ours, so it went into a restricted fund, so that it did take us a few months to get a person hired. And then we did start to work on the training. So I believe that was the methodology behind restricting it.
My understanding of why it was restricted was because they weren't sure what software was going to be needed because the lab was coming over from the attorney's office and they weren't sure if it was up to date or they might be using different software. And so until those needs were identified, it was put in restricted funding. It was $30,752.
I can't hear whoever's speaking.
So it was 30,700 approximately, that was taken out of the restricted to make the forensic lab operational for 2017. The ones we're requesting for 2018 are items we've identified, software and training to get the certifications. As those certifications are obtained, that figure should go down for the request for 2019.
So if you understand that, then what we're looking at is, we need to get the certification so that those that are in the lab can run the lab and be court certified as experts. That will go down as they receive those certifications. And then occasionally there's a recertification or some other training that might have to come along, but the big push now is to get the individuals who don't have those certifications, get them certified so that we can use that lab and then use it in the prosecution with expert witnesses.
So looking at the breakdown, Sheriff or Mike, it talks about $21,562 for the yearly software renewal. But you have listed in here 5 licenses for like Adobe Photoshop at $2,600.20, and that seems kind of high for how Adobe's current method is. But then what I hear you saying is next year it'll go down because you've asked for $25,145 in training. But one of those trainings is in Moab, one's in Orlando this year, obviously,
Right.
which at that lab, it may or may not be there next year. Would we not be sending somebody to training every year to make sure we're up to date?
Once we obtain these initial certifications, that certification will last a year or two. We won't need to recertify in those specifics for a couple years. That's why the initial certification is gonna be a one-time thing.
Once a certification is garnered for the individual, usually the costs come in addition if there are changes in the technology. So something comes along where you can use a different technology, then they've got to go get trained on that. So we're not sure when the technology will change, but it's currently, this is the best projection that we've got based on current technology that we actually have and are purchasing for the lab. And this is a big, huge area in prosecution. This goes towards all the child sexual abuse and pornography cases. It helps us get into cell phones to crack drug activity and those kinds of things. And it's becoming more and more critical to base a good prosecution or a successful prosecution on getting that digital information out of those different devices.
Well, and I'm very supportive of this. Obviously, I've talked to you about this. I just want to make sure we're not trapping ourselves by saying next year it should go down because, again, we don't know what technology will do. We don't know where or what trainings may or may not be available. I think we just need to deal with what we have in front of us, and that was really my comment for that.
Yeah, thank you. That is correct. Hopefully there'll be a reduction if the technology doesn't change, and then it would be.
Okay. On-call pay for evidence victim advocates.
So line 90 there for the on-call pay for evidence victim advocates. We currently do not pay them an on-call rate. We require them, or have been, out of the goodness of their hearts, they've been responding late at nights to crime scenes to help with processing. Also, victim advocates have been coming out, child abuse cases, sex abuse cases, domestic violence cases, receiving no on-call pay. We've ran into some issues where we haven't had them available because of other things, so this on-call rate would help ensure that they are available to respond.
So when they're on, if they're receiving the on-call pay, then they are required to be in a condition and an ability to respond immediately. And that's what that ensures. Otherwise, we find out it's against the FLSA to require them to do that without paying them.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, line 92 there for that Deputy 2 position for the Justice Court. This is a position we've requested continually for security there. Courts in session, we currently man it with part-time people, which we're having difficulty hiring anybody that can work during the middle of the day. Often moving people from other courts to man that while court's in session. For the security of the judges, the court personnel, and the public there, that's the request for that position.
To the one above, the probation unit operational costs.
Oh, apologize.
Yeah.
The probation unit operational costs, so the 2 probation deputies as well as the office specialists that are working over there, these costs are just for annual operational for replacing the evaluations that we need on each participant of the program, which, by the way, the program's seen significant success this year based only on two deputies working through that. So these are costs. Sorry, I didn't have the book. I didn't realize we were going through all these again, but now we have that.
Let me make a quick comment on those two as far as that probation unit. This was the effort that you funded for 2 years to look at the results to help us move people in under the JRI model to put them into treatment and then track them. And they are currently full. We have a full contingent. How many are they tracking? 50, 25 per deputy was what we figured they could handle. There is still currently a need. The judges are requesting to put more people in there, but we can't take them because we are full. So I think the concept's going to prove out that there is the need, and we probably in the future, near future, will have to expand that unit to basically allow us to keep less people in jail and break that recidivism cycle.
Sure. A question. The attorney and the auditor might yell at me here in just a minute, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. You know how to run your department. If I was to look at this and to look at the numbers, look at how much money I have available, and say, Sheriff, I can give you, and this isn't a number, this is a hypothetical, $1.2 million for patrol in a restricted account. I need you to come to me as you work through the process throughout the year and draw from that fund based on your needs as you work through your budget. How would you feel about that?
That's a new concept. I hadn't thought much about it, but it would give us an opportunity to look at, and this is the thing that's been constantly a problem. January 2nd, as soon as that budget opens, then at the end of the legislative period, there's new mandates from the courts, there's new mandates from the legislature, and things change. So we're constantly trying to prioritize those lists, even what's currently even funded, and bringing money out of one to another based on what we can and can't find, and scrapping it together. So
and that's why I'm saying,
right.
I mean, I don't, I've got to get to a number where I can
Sure.
pass a balanced budget.
Understand.
I'm looking at this going, how do I say, well, Sheriff, you say you need this probation unit operational court thing, but you really don't. And so that's problematic for me, but I can certainly work within a budgetary number. I can say, this is how much money I can say you can come and ask me for. Here's what it's going to be. Come and ask me for it when you need it.
If it could be separated into an amount in enforcement and then an amount in
corrections, right.
that would be much more tenable.
And can that get us to a point, and this would kind of be a commission question, to where we can pass a balanced budget and give a little more flexibility and a little more opportunity for, especially in cases like this, elected department heads to manage the funds that we've said, here's what we're willing to give you. Be a good steward, because the taxpayers trusted you with their vote just like they have me.
So I don't disagree with you, but I have 2 points. The problem is one, a balanced budget's a federal term because we already know we're budgeting into our reserves no matter what. So but my other problem is restricting and then having them come to us. In the sheriff's case, we caused the sheriff's department a lot of great harm this year unintentionally. It was actually we tried to do it a good way by not giving them a portfolio commissioner and having all the commissioners be it, but we created great harm. And so to have the sheriff have to come to us and account how, if we're not available, if we're out of town, whatever, to how to spend the money that he is saying he needs when there's already safeguards in there for that. That's my problem. Restricting money on an elected official for them to do their job, that's where I have a problem with it.
And part of the question I would have there is because my understanding is statutorily, these are supposed to be identified by line item.
That's right. And I don't have a problem with that.
And so that's why I'm wondering if it, because of mechanism, if restricted is a mechanism that makes it possible for greater flexibility without having to go through and line item everything. So I respect your comment, Greg. But that would be part of my question is if it would need to be in that restricted to actually give that flexibility based on current statute and law.
But then we need to allow him the opportunity as the sheriff particularly to come to any one of the 3 commissioners to sign and release those funds as he needs. Not all 3 of us.
Or go back to the chair or some priority.
Some priority.
That we can establish as good to go. Because sometimes we get caught in that procedural quagmire of we got 1 vote, but maybe not 2. Well, we heard we have 2, but then maybe, it hasn't gotten up to Deneen or to Brian to allow that. So that can really slow us down, especially on some of those that are critical when it comes to something like the outbreak of the hepatitis A, when you need to move fast.
And that's, again, I recognize this is a little different concept, but
I think the concept is valid.
I'm throwing that out there for this discussion to see if we can't maybe make this a little more functional.
I think it's a good concept, actually. I think it would work well in the changing parameters that we do face. Because static line items and stuff just turn into a quagmire trying to move a few dollars here or large amounts of dollars here and there when in fact we just can't know what those priorities are. We establish them in August and September, and by the time December comes, they've already changed. And by the time mid-year in 18 comes around, many of them will have changed.
And part of my thought process with this, it just makes it so I have to sign less budget transfers. Right? I mean, because I've gone through this year and I've noticed at the end of the year, all of a sudden, it seems like every morning I get in, there's 5 papers on my desk because you guys need to shift funds around.
Right. And part of that is trying to be a good fiduciary in the fact that we say, okay, what happens if all hell goes, pardon the language, breaks loose in October? We need that money to make sure we can move something around to help pay for some of those contingency things that we can't forecast. And so as the end of the year gets near and we see, well, we probably aren't going to have one now, then we could go back and spend those for what a lot of the times they originally planned to put forward, but we've had to move part of the money out for somewhere else, so we've got to move the rest of that money back in from another place. And it's just a big juggling act.
Yeah. I'd like to jump in on this too, because the budget process since I've been here has been always very concerning, because I think some of the philosophy of the past I'd like to see change. The reason why I push towards a budget number that we can feel comfortable with is because even in my own personal life, I deal with this where we say this is what we can afford, this is what we can do, and here's how we're going to have to start the budget, and then come to a number that's out there. And I mean, we can go down through these line items over and over and over and over, and we'll still wind up at the same spot that we're gonna that we could get to if we just to look at it. So I don't know. I can't say that one of these is more high priority than the other. I'm sure they're all needs. I'm sure they're all something that needs to happen in law enforcement. But if we could get past maybe that everything has to be done by the end of the year, because like you say, we don't know what's coming next year.
Sure.
We have no idea what's coming next year. If we could get to a point to where we budget based on, these are our operating expenses to kind of keep us going, and understanding that as we go through, because usually what happens is as soon as we close the budget, the perception is it's closed till the end of the year. You can't come back and ask for anything else. Well, that doesn't really happen in budgets. I don't know about your family or
Yeah.
how you budget for businesses, but there's always an ongoing conversation that happens as we move down through the process and as things happen. The state can come to us and say, you will do this. And, oh, well, we didn't budget for that, so now we're gonna have to do something to make it work.
And
And that's always the concern I have, is that we tend to, as I've seen it, we tend to budget as if this is the only time we're gonna get a chance to go after everything that we possibly can to make it for the year. And that's a scary year because you don't know. So you kind of have to go a little high to say if we're going to make it or not.
And that's a perfect analogy. I mean, just look at the issue of the courts now staying and readjusting some things with the courts. It's put enough pressure on us that we need a new individual to do court transports because they're only within the finite time the courts are open. So we can't just bring people in on overtime to fill that. There has to be a body available during that 8 to 5 when the courts are open. Well, they're not even open 8 to 5 anymore. They're open till like 8 to 9 at night. So that has caused us an issue, but it's based on the volume of the courts.
Right.
And we really didn't see that till last year into 17, and now we see it going forward into 18. So yeah, you're right. There's things that we can't foresee that cause that kind of expense. So I would welcome the concept and look at trying to move towards something that would be more flexible.
But Commissioner Lee, and I'm not disagreeing with what you say, but then we need to scrap the tentative budget and go back and actually address as a commission each department and give them an actual number.
Oh, yeah, I'm just saying, right now, we're in the middle of a process that we've been doing for some time, but, if we could kind of change that thinking to where, we're working through it. I hated when I first came in and I heard over and over that there was departments that didn't know exactly what was in their budget till after the first of the year. And yet I hear that all the budgets are sent out and they should be in the email boxes and there's this back and forth, and that I think we're trying to say, let's open everything up. We've had a lot more conversations, a lot more open meetings with the process, so that when we get done with the budget, everyone should know. There shouldn't be any
guessing.
we've been talking about it and going over it, and that's the goal. And I would love to see I don't know if it can be done this year, because we're already halfway into a process that's already going on, but how do we get to a point to where we look at it and say, the requests that we have out there are more than we have when it comes to revenue or to our reserves? How do I make that decision? Am I qualified to make that decision all the way through? I would say no. That's the reason why we ask a lot of
No, but
questions.
based on the reality of the lack of funds, I think we are where we are. So we've started out with the process and the tentative budget. These asks are on top of that. At some point, you need to make a decision financially, and then we'll make it work.
Yeah, and that's the hybrid that you and I spoke about.
Yes.
We want to make sure the employees with a market study go forward with that, and we know that there's going to be some give and take. But
Yeah.
I don't know how to list yours or anybody else's budgets and say, this is number one, this is number two, this is operational, this can be, I went down through with those in my portfolio and talked about, well, what about this? How about if we move that around, see if that'll work?
Because this is more as a snapshot in time, and
Right.
it doesn't reflect the future and reality of the future. It never can, unless we all have a crystal ball.
Well, I think for me, the easiest thing to do that when you say we can't do one, we can't do two, I disagree. I think that's exactly what we need to do. I think we need to first and foremost say our residents of Utah County want us to protect them, so safety, anything that has to do with safety needs to be funded. And then we make a priority list that goes that way. So when we're talking about things that need to be cut potentially in-house for this year, would be additional trainings, whether it's in HR or the Justice Court or whatever, and those are the first two from our budgets as I'm looking through my notes. Those simple things can be cut because 10,000 here, 10,000 there, 100,000 here. they do help fund and do some of these shortfalls that we're talking about. And training, there's not going to be a whole lot of training going on if we have all this inequity and all these things that we're doing anyway. So we ought to probably go back through and say, okay, you know, what has to do with safety of everybody. Maybe the freeze this year is on replacing certain equipment or adding new equipment. I think that's exactly what we need to do, unless it has to do with safety and protection of our citizens first and foremost.
See, I think to your point on that, just to push back a little bit on it, if that was a decision that you're talking about and saying you think that maybe training should be cut out, how do you know that more than the departments know? Because maybe some of that training is absolutely needed and necessary for the operation of what's going on.
Yeah, there would be a minimum level because the state requires 40 hours in-service training every year for every sworn officer. Again, we can accomplish that by doing in-house training, so there are economies that we can do this cheaper than others, and then others that are not cheap based on a homicide investigation or new techniques. Those are not generally taught locally, so we have to go somewhere. So those kinds of trainings cost more, but the bulk of the people who are in a static position that are not on the front of the investigative edge, they can be taught in-house and done at a relatively inexpensive amount of money.
Okay, so I'll throw out an idea for discussion. This is with the commissioners on this one. What if we looked at, and I'm gonna go back to a number, we found a number that we felt comfortable with, that we could pull out of reserves, a certain amount of money, we kept the tentative budget in place. There's a certain amount of money that comes out of the reserves, whatever that X number is, and said, okay, we have this amount of money that's workable. We form a committee with those that are affected by, because they're not all affected by, property tax, general fund. There's buckets of money. So those that are affected by that, they get together, maybe one per department, and you walk down through and say, this is the issues that I have. I need to have this for operational purposes, and you come back as a recommending committee to the commission and say, this is kind of how we've worked down through it. This is the X amount of money that we think can be allocated to the different departments, and that would be a next week proposal that says, this is how we think we can spend that money in an appropriate way.
I just disagree. I think that's passing the buck for us. That's just my initial thought, is I think that's what we're paid to do. So, for example, and again, going in my binder, the very first group we ever met with on the first day was HR, Justice Court, and Children's Justice Center. When I go through here, it's very easy for me to say, okay, well, the tentative budget based on the additional request the second time in HR, there's $100,000. When I go to the Justice Court and they say there's $11,761, I can say no, because we just fixed the judge's increase, so we don't need to do that. I mean, I don't need somebody else to go through and do that. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. I just don't agree when we're the ones that have been participating in all of the budget meetings, and we know what everybody's been saying to us for a couple of years. So, like, if we're told that, hey, when somebody retires, we're not going to replace that, and then somebody replaces them and then asks for additional money, well, then we need to hold people responsible for that.
So
not somebody else.
In essence, what I'm hearing you saying on that is that we are going down through and making the decisions on the departments on what is needed and necessary. So maybe a second thought would be then for us to go down through this thing appropriately is the only other option that I can see is that the commissioners go down through, if we use that model, and say, I'm for that, I'm against that, I'm for that, I'm against that. And if we have two commissioners that say, yeah, I'm for that, then that becomes the funded, and if we have the money, because obviously we're gonna have to get to it. And that's the only way that I can see this working.
Yeah, that works for me.
For me, that's just not how I've ran my life. I've always allocated a broad budget and said I have this amount of money and I'm gonna spend X dollars on, fuel for this year, and then I've worked from a monetary standard, and then I've made my purchases according to the monetary standard I set forward at the beginning. And so when I've started to go through this process, obviously it's my first process, it's been very difficult for me to look at line item things outside of a general concept of how much I'm willing to give a department. And so for me, it becomes a lot easier to say I'm willing to give a department $1.2 million and work from the financial side of it on a figure basis rather than I think this is needed, I don't think that's needed.
I guess my only concern with you, with your statement on that is, but that's assuming funding the entire tentative budget. And that's my pause here, is because, again, when I go through, and again, it's the very first one that we did, human resources, 33.8 in time limited employees, 71.50 in workday virtual training, 50,000 for a new Mercer contract. When the commission bought this and we did all these things, we were told certain things. And so the thing is why are we going to expend, why do we take and give it to people when it's, okay, well, it's only 100,000 because it's not 1.2 million or it's this or that. What I'm saying is those are some of the things that, I think we do need to forego. If I go into, into the public works budget, it's like, okay, well, our roads are already at decay. Well, so do we just live with them at decay again for another year and say, nope, you don't need this and we don't need a second vehicle and things like that? Like, I don't know.
See, and on the tentative budget, I mean, I went through with departments and asked the questions, how come you can't fund this part of out of the tentative budget with the next one or one of the requests out there, and which it was eliminated. So for the most part with the tentative budgets, I feel fairly confident with where we're at on a tentative budget basis, just because we've gone through some of those processes and asking the questions. Are you suggesting that we run down through the tentative budget again? Are there areas of the tentative budget that is off that you'd like to look at?
No. What I'm saying is the commission can't go and make the statement to every department head where we say the tentative budget is not ours. That was a statutory obligation for the clerk auditor, because then it sounds like we're passing the buck. And then all of a sudden now we're accepting the tentative budget as something and then going and making a judgment on additional requests. So that statement's just contradictory to what we've been telling everybody for a month. That's how it feels to me.
I see.
Maybe I could put one more just thing to help you on your decision making. Sheriff's additional asks start on line 72. If you look at those, they go through enforcement and jail. Well, starting in 72 is the jail, and those are ranked 1 through 16. So if there's a bucket of money that you think would be reasonable to give to us, we will still continue to go through those priority as they are. That may help you establish an amount. And then you go down to where you start on enforcement, line 88, as we have discussed already. Those, again, are also ranked 1 through 27. So at some point, if there's things that you think shouldn't be, or you're willing to fund and not willing to fund, we'll take those monies and plug those in, and we will continue to go through the priorities as they are now. Nothing really has changed as of yet based on the priorities that we've submitted, because they're pretty recent submissions. So that might help you get to a block amount in corrections and a block amount in enforcement, just for thought.
Well, but Sheriff, the other problem is this budget, your additional requests are 1186 roughly and 1804 for patrol and then corrections. The problem is we have still left you a big unfunded gap for everybody who's eligible for retirement that you eventually have to overcome a shortfall of nearly $500,000 of liability.
Right.
And so to give you a pocket of money, what happens if you have 15 people retire this year? Then that $500,000 is not even close.
Yeah, it can be. That's correct. It can be eaten up, and in the past it has.
And that's kind of going off the old philosophy, though, and that is that once the budget's established, there's nothing else that happens through the year. And so if we buy into that philosophy, then yes, I mean it's a huge risk. So if we look at our reserves that are out there, and I'm not one to say that we spend all of our reserves, because then we have no flexibility into the future. If we go that route, we don't have a flexibility for things that could come up from the legislature or anything else. We're caught, and so that, again, I'll just say it again. I'd like to see us find some sort of budget number that we're comfortable with, understanding and trying to switch that mentality from this is the first and last time for the next year that we can actually have these discussions, but have something that's workable for us. And as we go down through the budget process, as things pop up, that we can address them and try to find ways to make it work, realizing that revenues are gonna change too and come in. Deneen's been really good at finding that revenue point. It's usually really close. It's not off. So I feel comfortable with that. But we just have a lot of unknowns next year that are coming up that we don't know. So we have to keep something back in case we get hit with them. Otherwise, then what do we do?
Yeah, I understand.
Well, then what we do is in January, starting of the first year, we go through truth and taxation to increase the revenue to fund. So we know we're going to spend into reserves because we know we're budgeting the appropriate needs of the county. And therefore we go through that process, because the reality is that even though the gentleman did state correctly that if we double our tax increase, then, we're still in 29 out of 29. Well, we don't need an additional $40 million of funds. If we just even take, and I'm talking on the property tax collection alone, if we just even take a 25% increase, that's $10 million. Well, all of a sudden your revenue goes from 78 to 88 million, and we're not even having this conversation. So then we still have the same number. So if we then allow for inflation for a few years and we went to, say, a 35% rate, all of a sudden we're still able to do some of the things that we're talking about in the future as far as capital expenses, improvements to the building, increased services for a growing county, while population and growth helps fund it. But then we go through that process so that we're actually not short funding. We're actually funding the needs of the county today, knowing that we're going to do the responsible thing starting January 2nd, because that's when business resumes, or whatever day. And we go through that process to actually fund the actual needs of the county.
Okay, let's work that through though on a realistic basis. Let's assume that all happens. We don't actually see those funds for 2 years. I mean, it takes time to go through the process. It doesn't happen where it's just automatic. And we're in a year right now in which we have to anticipate and we have to budget appropriately.
Right. So kicking the can isn't going to help us.
No, what I'm saying is that we need to budget in this year with what we have and try to look for the future and what we can do to eliminate it. But it's that scenario you put forth there, and when we go through truth and taxation, it goes onto the ballot box. It gets voted in. It gets implemented in January 1st. We don't collect the revenues on those things until the end of the next year. That's 2019 at the end of the next year. So there's a 2-year process in this. And so as we're looking at budget today, we've got to budget appropriately.
If I might ask though, aren't we always spending in anticipation anyway, most of the time, as far as the tax?
Every time.
Is that not the way it works? I mean, we don't collect the tax at the end of the year?
Yeah, we don't collect them, but because we have managed our funds, we don't have to do what you call tax anticipation notes, which is some mechanism that some entities use because they're spending and they don't have their reserves, and they're spending in anticipation of taxes coming in, but.
So we're spending in real time.
We have the reserves and we don't have to use that tool, which potentially also can affect bond ratings and other things, which as we maintain this particular level, we save money whenever we bond and do stuff that way too.
Based on our work session last Wednesday and the numbers that Deneen quoted, the reality is if we did a number that was about $9 million above our revenue for this year, we could fund and run the county for the next 2 years while that number is coming in and we adjust the tax rate and get it back to a healthy standard, because right now we're not healthy. And I understand what I'm saying. That does, like Brian said, that affects the bond ratings and things like that. We're not in the healthiest of situations. We have a lot of growth and we got a great county, but we need to get us back into the healthy category.
The Jeff Beuman, County Attorney, and I don't mean to divert too far back, but Bill, you made a comment a moment ago about how after the tentative budget we could maybe work through the process. And I just wanted to speak on my behalf, and I think most of your department heads, that the idea you floated a minute ago about could we maybe defer some of the problem solving, the workout of some of the post-tentative budget issues to a committee of department heads or whatever. I think it's been done successfully in other counties. I think your department heads, I think, are very professional. I think we are good at beating each other up about monies, because I know if the sheriff's asking for too much, it's gonna come out of my budget.
Right.
But in other counties, it has been done successfully, where the department heads, along with representative, of course, it's always the clerk auditor there, and the commission, if they want to attend. We work out many of the problems that you're gonna have to resolve this year in the budget cycle. And then we provide the commission kind of a second base document after the tentative budget, where then you can go in and adjust without having to go through every line item. The departments can do that for you. So I think most of us would support that idea in the upcoming years.
Well, I appreciate that, because I think that you come with a skill set that knows your budget and knows your needs. And besides that, you also know each other, and you can say, hey, look, you know, it's my turn on some of this, you know, let's work together with this and come to it. And that's what I'd like to find, is some collaboration in which we're not trying to pull apart and separate and say, hey, I want all I can get on it, or I think this and that, and it doesn't matter about the other departments, because we, as a county, we're as a whole, we have to deal with the whole thing. And so I appreciate those comments, and I think it would be advantageous for it to have a committee like that works down through and says, this is the money that we have, how does this work, what's the give, what's the take, these are the needs that we absolutely have to have. We don't have that, we can't operate, or we can only operate for 6 months, and then we're gonna have another discussion, which is fair enough. But that way we get to some sort of a resolution in which everyone on board kind of has an understanding level, instead of some of the things I hear of, well, that department seems to get it all, or that department doesn't get anything, or whatever that happens.
Right, and that discussion's always guided by the commission's priorities, as well as the tentative budget and the revenue numbers provided by the clerk auditor. So it doesn't impinge upon the commission or the clerk auditor's authority.
Right.
But with all due respect to this conversation going on, the reality is this is what we tried to do with the salary study. We did a darn good job of messing it up. And the reality is what we were told is that it's not equitable and this and that, and that we can't afford to do the right thing. So we've already been being told by everybody. So why are we continuing to pass the buck? If we can't afford to do something this year, then what we need to do is tell the citizens, I'm sorry, whether it's our fault or previous commissioner's fault, we cannot fund the essential needs of the county until we have gone ahead and made these cuts. And unfortunately, whatever that is, the commission needs to bear the brunt of that, because our previous predecessors have done nothing, and we've done nothing to help that either. So we don't need to pass the buck and put together more committees and do this. This sounds like federal government, and nothing's happening there either. So it's time for us to, if it's picking a number, I'll say it. I'm comfortable with $88 million, because I feel comfortable with the numbers. $88 million for the next 2 years, knowing I'm going through to instigate and go through truth and taxation starting January 2nd of 2018.
Okay, I actually disagree with some of the points you put in there, but just for time, we'll kind of move forward with what we can do. Commissioner, do you have any thoughts?
Starting point at 8 million. I'm not saying that's the number I'm comfortable with, but.
Let's see, 88, let's just get down to the numbers on the 88 million. That takes what out of our, I haven't run that through my mind,
Deneen.
basically.
What I'm really saying is that's a 10% increase over last year's budget because of our growth and everything that we have. I'm saying, based on the salary study numbers, I believe that this county is well under 10% of underfunded in many categories.
So 70.
So based on our tentative budget, our initial number, what's the difference between 88 and that?
It's basically a 9.3.
9.1.
9.1. So that's spending all the reserves. I'm not comfortable.
I'm not comfortable spending all of our reserves there.
In the course of the 9.1, you've already said you're gonna take some of the, or the 9.7 that we have to work with, you've already said you're gonna
We've got
take a portion.
3.2 million gone.
Yeah.
But I think the 88 the 88 included the salary, correct? Greg?
Yep.
Correct?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Commissioner Lee wanted a total number for the budget.
Right.
So I'm just throwing out 88. If we're just going to throw out numbers that we're trying to fit, rather than talking about the actual needs, and then, you know, I understand it's a process. But the reality is we just keep talking about the process, and we're not actually doing anything. The real reality is what everybody in that room and everybody in the county ought to ask is, what have we done? What have we done as commissioners to better the county and moving us forward? We keep talking about it, but we need to make sure we now do it. That's what everybody's looking at us to do.
So the county provides services, and that's a discussion. In some areas, we can say we're lacking in services. Do we say that the entire county is deficient in its production of services to the citizens in the county? I'd say no to that. I don't think that that's a general statement that we can say we don't provide what is needed and necessary for the services. Do we have deficiencies? Absolutely. There's some areas that I think we need to shore up, but just a general statement across the board and in a failure note, if you want to put it there, a failure letter for the county, I think I disagree with that.
What I'm saying is I don't believe that the employees who are currently serving the citizens are failing. I'm saying that we are failing the citizens of Utah County by not giving all of the tools and all of the manpower that they need to perform the essential needs. That's the failure I'm talking about, not in the actual workforce that we have. They are doing a great job. It's the fact that we keep cutting in every department head for 3 years. This is our third budget cycle for you and I. And we've gone through, and every year people come to us and said, we need this, and we keep saying, nope, nope, nope. And all of a sudden they keep coming at us with the same request, and we keep looking at them saying, like, oh, we shot this down twice. Why are you coming again? Well, maybe it's because they need it.
Yeah. Do you have a number that you're comfortable with, Commissioner?
I'm working on it. We're already past my comfort level, but I also recognize
But again, that $9 million
that we have to fund.
So I go back to the work session. On Wednesday when Commissioner Lee questioned my numbers on the numbers, and Deneen went through and read them exactly. What has changed between Wednesday and today, where we went from the legal limit of the $28 million in reserves based on the percentage of property tax collection, and then just over $9 million in our capital expense account? What has changed?
Well, we still have priorities that we've listed from the 28 all the way down to the 17, which we enunciated in our department or in that work session. And then at the beginning of this year was the $17 million, but we took a certain percentage of that out, whatever it was, $8 million, and that's where we get down to the 9.7.
Right, but if we want to talk about the real history of the county as well, we also need to realize that all these departments have been such good stewards of the money that every year we always worry, and we're going to open up the budget, I'm sure, again, just to cover everything because that's the responsible thing. But the Sheriff's Department has always turned back in over $1 million, and everybody has always turned back in more money than what we've given them. So the reality is we can think that we're $6 million deficient, but we've been funding the government this exact same way for many years, and we have yet to deplete any of our reserves or the capital expense account.
Okay, so
how have we been doing?
help me understand, as this is my first budget process, if we're continually giving back money, then why do I need to raise taxes?
Because where they're giving back the money in this is because is only in the 1100 because we don't allow them to fund it out of the 1100. Why we need to raise taxes is because we do not have literal safety for our employees. When the chief law enforcement officer and his chief deputies and the person over emergency services state that for the county, we are not prepared for everything, and we are just literally running from fire to fire rather than being aggressive, then we are not giving them everything. When we get a salary study that tells us that we are not in compliance, that we are not even close to competitive, we're below average, and our benefits are also now below average, then we need to rectify that. And the only way to do that is to increase revenue. And to increase revenue.
Commissioner Graves,
Yeah.
I'm still confused because you're saying we're not giving everything, but then they're giving money back. So if there's money coming back, why aren't we just more appropriately allocating the funds initially?
That's a great question.
We can answer part of that.
I think we can.
It's a criminal offense for a department head to overspend their budget, especially an elected one. So
Right.
we have to come in below our budget, or it's a criminal offense for us.
And on top of that, Commissioner Graves is right. The bulk of that return is out of the 1,100 or 1,300 where wages and benefits are, and so we're not fully staffed. Should we ever become fully staffed, then that money would go away. So we're operating understaffed based on conditions of employment in the county having a good economy and hard to attract people. So it's kind of cyclical with the wage issue, you know. We can't get the wages up to be fully staffed, and there are going to be times when we get that money back. But we've tried, and at least I have, I can speak for everybody, tried not to take that money out without specific authorization from the commission out of 1,100 or 1,300. Because at some point in time, if we do get fully staffed, that's not an option anymore, and that money won't be coming back. And what we have been turning back out of those other areas has decreased every year till it's pretty minimal.
And it's also
Okay.
the hiring gaps. You have someone leave on January 1, it takes you 30 or 45 days to get a new recruit in there, so that money
Or
is back.
60
Oh,
or
okay, and
70.
so this, your explanation perfectly illustrates my point and actually why I asked the question. Because when the general public hears that you're turning money back and I'm wanting to raise their taxes, it's a pitchfork, right? Because there's a misunderstanding of the process there. That's why I feel it's essential that we budget appropriately within our reserve this year, and that we go to the public with an explanation that was just given here to allow the public to understand the process that's working, to educate them from the assessor's office on how their property tax is taken in, how much of their property tax actually even comes to the county, how that assessment takes place, and then where we're spending that money so that they have a firm understanding of why we are having this discussion. Because I believe part of my responsibility as an elected official is to be transparent as in government. And that means before I throw something on a citizenry, that I go through the process of helping them understand the whys. And so I have to budget appropriately this year with the money that I have before me and work through the process of helping the citizens understand where a county is at, and then asking, are you comfortable? Do you support us in this action to make sure we can continue to provide those services?
The only gap in what you're saying for me is we're also not then planning and preparing the county for the future.
Chris Polson, Utah County Assessor, and I agree with everything that Mr. Ivy just said. I want to reiterate what Sheriff Tracy has said too also. We have this double-edged sword, and that is if we can't fund a proper salary survey and implement it, then we continue to have vacancies because we cannot retain the people. And by not retaining the people, we are continually returning money back to the funds that we're budgeting from because of vacancies. That's the double-edged sword, I think, that Mr. Tracy was trying to explain.
I appreciate that.
And that's, we've tried this year with, to look at a budget as a whole and move things a little differently than has been done in the past, realizing that that is the case, and I'm sure that our monies coming back this year are going to be less than they've been in the past. I'm assuming. Would you, are you looking at seeing the kind of the same thing?
Well, I think that's another issue that goes into it of why we start the budget process. The information we request is what are actually going to be the benefits, because that tends to inflate the number too. But I can tell looking at, the sheriff's office that there may be savings in 1,100 or 1,300, meaning the wages or the benefits, but the overtime account is overdrawn. And I think that speaks also to the fact that they have had difficulty in hiring and keeping the positions staffed. So, without a full analysis, I can't answer that question, but I can see that what's going to be turned back, at least in that specific office, is not going to be very much money.
Right. Which is just a reality that we live with on that one.
Well, it's also because we don't fund properly, or haven't in years past, their vacation and leave time or their retirement. So the fact they still have been able to turn back money is showing really how good a stewards with tax dollars they've been.
I mean, across the
But
county,
now they
we've
are
got a $3
coming to
million
us and saying-
liability there.
Right, and right now they are coming to us and saying, we're there. We need help to keep us safe.
So using
Why
that,
we're not,
using that $3 million liability on there, if we spend everything we have in the reserves and we have that going out, that puts us at a pretty big risk.
sure. Well, there's another reason for a tax increase, because we've been unfunding liability. We have all these unfunding liabilities. Again, I keep saying financially we're not healthy. Everybody wants to argue, but
Well-
we keep making more points.
I mean, it's on our books as a liability, unfunding. I know we're probably splitting hairs with it, but still, it is a liability that we have out there that has to be paid. And it usually comes back to the department, and they feel it when that happens. Okay. You still working on numbers?
Yeah.
It's all about numbers.
Again, as I mentioned, and this is, just for the public record, this is, I've ran my own, I've been self-employed my entire life until I started here at the county. And I've always operated my business under a certain principle. And that was, I had a set amount that was always in my checking account. Because I knew when I got below that I was in trouble. And there were times that I'd get below that periodically, but every dime went right back into developing that protection and that buffer. And as a result, I've never had to file a bankruptcy. I've always been able to keep my bills paid, and I've been financially responsible. And so I'm already at a juncture with our reserves when I look at how fast we can spend money in this county. I look at the reserve number right now and I go, I'm really uncomfortable with where we're at. And so I want to make sure that this budget process, that I am still keeping us away from the edge as much as possible, recognizing that we have to move forward. And so I'm trying to navigate that in my head and my gut on where that particular number is. I'm getting close. But that's where my background comes from, that, and that's why I approach it this particular way, because it's how it's worked well for me in my life.
Okay, but here's my problem with when we pick an arbitrary number. Of our department heads and of our elected department heads, who is not telling us the truth, or who do we not believe is giving us the exact number that they need? Because if they are giving us the exact same numbers that they need to perform the needs, then we should fully fund them. If not, then we should sit down and talk to them as the executives of the county. So it's great that we're going to pick an arbitrary number, but I mean, the reality is the sheriff knows how to be a law enforcement officer. Jeff Human knows how to be the attorney. Well, if they keep coming to us and saying, we need this, Jeff has for 3 years said, I need this, I need this, I need this, and we've never given it to him, then the question is how can we then turn around and say, okay, great, we're not going to do it again because we're not comfortable?
I don't, you can only spend what you have in the bank, right? And I don't think that budgeting off of a dollar figure is accusing anybody of lying. I believe what they're telling me. But I also believe what's in my checking account and what's in my savings account. And what I think we should keep in our savings account.
Sure. But then the real shame is on us for all year, all three of us, for not getting to know more of the department heads and find out what their needs are, so that when the deadline for truth and taxation came in October, we could have that conversation so we didn't kick the can down an additional year to the end of 2019, because that's not a good enough reason to not do the right thing.
So you made a statement in there that I disagree with, and that is that the department heads know all about their budgets, and therefore we should fully fund them. Well, their first original ask coming in, I mean, if we're gonna call them whatever, manipulators or liars, which I just totally disagree with. It's called budgeting. It's called budgeting principles because they submitted stuff to us and then they come back and they revised it. They changed their own budgets and said, well, let's move this down here. I think I can take that off. And we've already gone through that process with them in which, the department heads have taken money out and said, okay, I don't need so many of these, or I don't need that, and yes, let's move that. And otherwise, we would just say every single year, well, let's just, what are your asks, what are your needs, and then that's the number, and we go from there every single time. It just doesn't work like that in a budget. We have to find a certain amount of understanding where we're at when it comes to the revenues and the expenses and what we're doing for the future.
But some of them pulled out their additional requests because they knew what the salary study was and they expected us to fully fund it and take care of their people.
Yeah, I know, but your statement was that we should just fully fund everything that's being asked, and that's just not really practical. I mean, I'd love to have that in my own family as well. Everything that my kids ask and everything, we just fully fund it. Doesn't happen.
That's not my statement at all. My statement was, if we don't believe that there needs, then we should tell them. But if we do believe them, then we should fund them because, again, that's their job to run it. That's what my statement is.
That's the reason why we go through the process. Yes, which is back and forth.
The sheriff needs an additional $2.9 million, period.
Any numbers yet? Any thoughts?
The closest I can get would be taking 6.7 from reserves.
Total?
Total. Leaves us 3 million for a rainy day. And to budget as needs arise. If we have to open the budget again.
What's that give you for a total?
It would be
near 85.
6.7?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then let's proceed with that number because the reality is we are running out of days.
85.6. And again, I'll reiterate, that's probably a little beyond the edge of my comfort level, but.
Yeah, I mean, we have to realize.
But I recognize that there are needs, because I've sat down with the departments, we have a statutory obligation to prosecute and defend people in this county. And my attorney's office is getting more and more cases because we have more and more people. We have a responsibility to protect public safety. And I need more patrolmen to keep citizens safe. We have a responsibility. And so I'm not trying to shirk that responsibility. I'm trying to exercise it with fiscal prudence to make sure that I don't jeopardize the well-being of the county, recognizing that this is a step in moving forward. I ran with a commitment to the people of this county that I would try and make things better one step at a time. And I feel that this is a step. It's even a little uncomfortable for me, but I listened to the needs, and it's a step for me.
And I can feel comfortable there, I guess. A couple of things for understanding. One, we do have a $3 million unfunded, if you want to call it that, or on the books liability. Now, I don't assume everyone's going to retire this next year. I don't think that's going to happen, so I'm not being naive about that. But that also puts us in a point to where, as we look at changing the differences between in our market study, that will more than likely cut into that 3 million that we're leaving in there as well. We have to understand that, because I would like to see us turn that corner to where when we do funding like this, the next year as things pop up, and they will, every single time we turn around, there's something else that's going to come up. That we have that $3 million in there. So as I do the math on it, 6.7, that was your number, right? 6.7? 6.7 minus the 3.2 that we already have that's going into the market study puts us at 3.5. $3.5 million with the ask that we have in here. Obviously, there's a major shortfall. I would again like to recommend and I as a backstop, I set up a whole bunch of meetings every single day till Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Monday at 9 o'clock, to maybe get together with department heads that are affected by that and work through and see where that $3.5 million can be spent appropriately within our budget. That seem,
The problem is with your backstop, as you want to call it, when we had the work session last time, you stated there, and it is recorded, that we can't talk about those budget numbers. You
I
said
know, and
you
that was my understanding at the time.
Okay.
And that's what was expressed to me, or as I took it from asking and concerns about that. And now I've been told by the attorneys that we can go through this. It has been cleared. I'm looking at them both, cleared for us to go through this process with a committee like that and have those kind of conversations. The question, Jeff, is that in that last work session that we had, the concern, as I understood it, is that we could not make final decisions in that work session, and so it kind of threw the balance out, and we left that with some frustration with everyone involved, I'm sure, because we couldn't go through that thinking about big ticket items. But from further discussion in talking with you, if we were to set up a committee like this and run down through it, would we be able to work through some of this as a recommendation, not as final numbers, because that has to happen in the commission meeting, I understand that, but final number or a recommendation to the commission on how to spend this $3.5 million?
The answer is yes, though I'll be frank, with a time compression, I'm not sure a committee can effectively do it because of our other commitments, and we haven't had the time to look at each other's budgets and understand each other's asks. Could we put an effort forth? Yes. But I'm worried that we don't have time to do it as a new committee getting together. I'm not sure we'd have I don't know, Chris.
Well, we had a question, that's what diverted us from listening earlier, but in the initial budget, did we have a component in there that was set aside for this salary study? There's nothing in there
No.
then? Okay.
There was
We were not aware if we did or not, so that's what we were talking
So
about.
the other question I have while Chris is standing there is of the $3.7 million, which it's actually still more than that because the 3.2 isn't out of general fund. Are we funding all of the assessing and collecting asks because they are not general fund money?
Well, there are other asks too that have outsourced resources, so they have their
That's
own
right.
revenue too.
Right.
Yeah, and that's, for clarification, for me, anything that's not general fund, that's self-funding, I have absolutely no problem approving. into
Not
the
just
budget.
self-funding, but has
Well,
more than a
has
basic
revenue source with it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, A and C would be a different fund, I don't know, it's still property tax.
Right, because that's, yeah, this is, we're
Back
just
to your
talking-
original question though, an effort being put forth, we will be happy to work with you on everything we can do. We are aware, just as you are, of the timing involved in this. I'm not familiar with everyone else's budget, so
I think
that would be,
yeah, we'll do whatever you would like, Commissioner. I just worry that it's an idea that we can easily implement next year, but you know the budgets much better than we do. I know my budget, but I don't know Chris's budget or anybody else's right now. And for us to get that done in 1 week may be a disservice to the commission. But we're willing to try.
The other option is recognizing that we have that $3.5 million, and we just go down through and say yes and no based off of one commissioner, two commissioners, and you get two, and then what will happen is it may turn out to be 4.5, and then we have to come back and do it again and take. That's the other option.
and I like the dialogue that's going on today, because Commissioner Ivy's concept of contingency funds. I mean, when you do your checkbook or anything else, you have contingency funds, because you know. But the way we've done this in the past, there's no contingency funds, yet as Mr. Buman has stated, we are all liable for our own, I mean, we can be prosecuted for not, if we go over on our funds. So we are aware that without those contingency funds, we have always been in a peculiar position.
Sure.
So
Okay.
anyway, we're happy. I don't want to speak for all the elected officials and department heads, but I'm going to. yeah, we're more than happy to step up and do whatever we need to do to facilitate this process.
And probably recognizing and realizing that there are different pots of money, and this that we're talking about here is general fund money. And so there are some that maybe necessarily aren't even a part of the conversation because they're not participating in that. So.
Richard Nelson, Public Works. On the 3.2 million that you talked about earlier with the salary study, do we know the proportion of that would come out of general fund versus the other accounts? Or is that something?
Yeah, that's a good question too,
because the full 3.2 I don't think would come out of general fund.
No, it won't all come out of general fund. So that's a good point because.
This is
That's why I
a rough
expected to
guess,
all
don't hold
yeah.
me to the number. But when I went through and did an analysis between just various plans, the general fund number, general fund departments, because there's going to be departments outside of the general fund that are still gonna need to be funded. For example, the Children's Justice Center, I mean, they have no more funding capacity. But just general departments located within the general fund, it's about 50%. So you're looking at about $1.6 million of that 3.2.
Okay, so that would increase to 3.5. And we can get those numbers after for conversation, but yeah, that's a good point because that's not all general fund. Any other comments?
Chris Paulson. Moving forward, are we gonna designate some facilitator at this point? Because right now we got a great idea, but no one's in control of steering this.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll be there every morning, 9 o'clock.
I will participate as much as possible. I'm at a conference for the Colorado River users, so.
I will be there when I'm feeling better, but I will participate electronically.
Okay.
Just to clarify, when you say you'll be there, are we talking about in the commissioner's chamber, in the conference room?
Conference room.
Yes, it's already been publicly noticed, so I think that's what we publicly noticed it as, that space up there, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
The ability to be down here needed.
If needed.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe it would be appropriate at this time to continue whatever regular agenda item we're on. Is it 10?
No, we're only on 10? Can't be only on 10.
11.
11, yeah, at least we're on 11.
I would move that we continue regular agenda item number 11 for 1 week.
Second.
I got a motion and a second to continue agenda item number 11 for 1 week. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. Okay, moving to our closed meetings. We only need 14 and 15, so.
Move that we strike regular agenda items number 12 and 13.
Second.
I got a motion and a second to strike agenda items number 12 and 13. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes
Aye.
3-0. Oh, yes, 3-0.
Move that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting to discuss character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual or individuals for today's date at this location following the completion of the regular agenda.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to approve and set a date, time, and location as stated number 14 on our regular agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0.
Move that we approve and set a date, time, and location for a closed meeting for a strategy session to discuss pending or reasonably imminent litigation for today's date at this location following the completion of the regular agenda.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve and set a date, time, and location as stated number 15 on our regular agenda. All in favor say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. We have no work session. Are there any public comments? Mr. Harlan.
Brook resident, Utah County employee. I've come to speak at public comment. Unfortunately, I was in court this morning and I was unable to attend the meeting where you were discussing the salary survey, but I would like to express my disappointment with you in the decision that was reached. I understand that there are budgetary constraints. But I think that this is evidence of a system of a separate set of rules that has existed in the county for far too long. And I think that salaries are one example. Commissioners, you may be aware you're compensated at a higher level than the governor, whereas my position is currently, according to this market study, underfunded approximately 26%. The 3% that you've given helps, but it doesn't do a lot. Workday is another great example that you've now required salaried employees to clock in and scrutinized our use of time, specifically exempting yourselves and your assistants, which I don't think there's any logical justification for. The county attorney has done a study to look at approximately whether or not we're being adequately compensated and whether or not we have the adequate numbers that we need to do our jobs. And I think that his numbers have shown that prosecuting attorneys in this office have approximately double the caseload of other counties of similar size. And I don't see how any of this addresses that. Unfortunately, due to the pay discrepancies, even though we do have double the caseload, there are attorneys in our office who qualify for food stamps, and I don't know how that can be justified. There have been some claims recently in the newspaper about how county employees don't trust the county commission and that there are morale issues in the county, and I think that both of those are correct, but I think that the blame for those has been misplaced because I think that looking at decisions like Workday and what has been done today with the salary survey have direct correlation to the morale and trust issues that county employees have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public record, I voted against exempting the elected officials and our employees from the workday reporting.
Rayfield Millett, Utah County, Recorder's Office, citizen on his own time. I'm sorry, could you restate what you said, Commissioner Ivey?
On the particular, just for the public record, I voted against exempting the elected officials and our assistants from reporting in the workday system.
Thank you. I want to echo those comments that were just stated by Carl, previous attorneys. Morale is severely low. I have not seen morale this low at this place for 20 years. I don't know how many people attended, but I got approximations for the Christmas party. The way with Workday, they feel that they're being treated like children, not adults, as Dr. McGrath would say. Who did the salary study? There are several things there. What you have is that they aren't adequately compensated, they're not adequately treated, fairly, I guess, in most people's minds. But there are severe things that is hurting efficiency, it's hurting morale, and those hurt productivity, I think, for people. You want to have a place where people enjoy to come to work and be proud of it. Instead, it's a laughing stock for many. Hashtag Eagle Mountain, hashtag Utah County. You want to be proud of it. You want to build it up instead of squashing its head. What we have here, do you want to give a dog a bone? Do you want to kick the dog? Do you want to give it fine meat? Or do you want it to be your best friend? Do we treat employees correctly and compensate them fairly so it's not a burden on their families? These things are occurring that they need to be adequately compensated. That whole study should have been thrown out. 80%. It is flawed. 80% is the market standard, not 50%, which is what occurred. And the RFP for that, I don't know what occurred there, but I understand what the sheriff's vote was. I disagree with all these things. 50% is not treating people correctly in line with market. I don't think it's just, and I hope those inequities will be rectified. But They weren't. You voted, you will be held accountable, and hopefully that the way that you want to do things in the future with possibly opening it up and doing actually adjustments in the taxation process, maybe raising the tax rate to make these inequities and make things whole, I think that's late in the system. But if that's what you need to do to make it good, I understand.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, we will close the public comments and move into our closed meetings.